Me, Frida. Written by Amy Novesky, illustrated by Diaz. On the warm cobblestone streets of Coyoacán, everyone knew her name. Frida Kahlo lived in the blue house with her new husband, the famous artist Diego Rivera. Frida was an artist too. The night the telegram arrived inviting Diego to San Francisco, Frida dreamed of a city far from her home in Mexico, and she painted a portrait of herself there. She packed her blue trunk, and she and Diego flew north. Frida had never left Mexico before. Soon they were standing in the very city she had painted. Diego, big as an elephant, Frida, a lovely little bird on his arm. They lived at 716 Montgomery Street in the Artist Quarter. Beneath a leaky glass roof and dangling globes of light, they drank café con leche and ate slices of oranges. Outside, the world was cool and gray. Frida felt very far from home. Diego was working on a mural for the city. While he sketched, Frida was restless. She strummed a guitar. She sang Mexican folk songs called corridos. Quiet carita, cooed Diego. He loved his beloved singing, but there was work to be done. Before Diego began painting, he wanted to study his subject. Frida followed him as he explored the city. They climbed up and down its many steep hills. They gazed up at its shiny skyscrapers. Diego thought they were great, like ancient ruins. Frida disagreed. They explored orchards and oil derricks, a gold mine, and redwood groves. They stood beneath towering trees. Diego felt empowered by everything he saw. Frida fell asleep on the way home. And then, with a team of assistants, Diego went to work painting entire city walls. Some nights, he didn't come home at all. Other nights, Mr. and Mrs. Diego Rivera attended parties. The city's elite celebrated Diego. Frida stood quietly at his side. No one even looked at her. On the long days without Diego, Frida felt lost. She was in a foreign city. She didn't speak much English, and she didn't have many friends. So Frida started exploring the city on her own. She wandered through the narrow street markets. She touched pretty birds in tiny ornate cages and searched in little shops for silk to make skirts. She admired moon-faced babies. Frida especially loved Chinatown. It smelled of incense, fish, and fog. Soon Frida felt bolder and rode on a streetcar. She took a ferry across the Golden Gate and walked in the green headlands high above the ocean. From there she could see the entire glittering city and all it held, including Diego. It was small enough to fit on the wing of a bird. For once, Frida felt larger than life. Me, Frida. She felt like she could fly. Frida went back to Montgomery Street and painted. She knew she was an artist too. While Diego painted his monumental murals about town, Frida painted small portraits at home. The local press called Frida's portraits passable, or good enough. Good enough was not good enough for Frida. She wanted to be great. One night, at yet another party, all eyes were on the great Mexican painter Diego Rivera. Frida stood quietly at his side, but she could hardly contain herself. She thought about the Americans' faces and how they resembled dough. She missed Mexico, and she was tired of being quiet. Suddenly, Frida began to sing, not just any songs, but the Mexican folk songs she sang to Diego while he worked. All eyes were on her, including Diego's. Huzzah! He shouted at the end of each verse. He always knew Frida was marvelous. That night, Frida painted something great, a colorful wedding portrait of herself and Diego. She painted Diego big and she painted herself small, just as the world saw them. But Frida knew she was more than this, and she put herself first. In the beak of a pink bird, she wrote a tiny note on a violet ribbon. Here you see us. Me, Frida Kahlo, with my adored husband Diego Rivera. I painted these portraits in the beautiful city of San Francisco, California, in April of 1931. Frida's painting, Frida and Diego Rivera, was featured in the 6th annual exhibition of the San Francisco Society of Women Artists. It was her first show. Adorned in her best dress and necklaces of ancient jade, her jet black hair braided, Frida walked proudly through the crowd. When people saw her, they stopped and stared at her in wonder. The end.